Hello, welcome back. My name is Courtney Hillhouse. Today we are talking with filmmaker Claire Swanson on another episode of A Closer Look. Claire is the filmmaker of the Community Connections LGBTQ Perspective Project, and we'll be discussing the community and belonging episode.
Hi.
Hi, Claire.
Hi. Really nice to see you and your cat again.
Thank you. We're both happy to see you as well. So first question, in this episode, there are several things that are suggested by the interviewees that help build community and a sense of belonging for LGBTQ plus youth. These include things like safe spaces, trusted adults, medical care that respects your identity, access to resources, and queer adult role models so that youth can imagine their futures. So when you were growing up, Claire, in the Upper Valley, which of these supports that were mentioned were the ones that you had access to?
So I didn't really have a safe space for youth for most of my teenage life here. My home was a safe place to be gay, fortunately, but I didn't have a safe place to be around my peers until I was 17 and I started going to the Junction Youth Center in White River Junction. They started having these LGBTQ social events, and I met a lot of other people in the community who didn't go to my school, and I think that's really important in these small towns because there may not be a lot of people like you at your school, and if they don't happen to be your friends, then what do you do? And I also reconnected with people at the Junction that I'd known when I was younger, like Vermontshire camps, Northern Stage camps, things I did as a kid, and that was really cool. And I heard recently that Listen closed the Junction down, which is really too bad because even though I've aged out of it now, it was so important to me, and I want other youth to have access to it.
I've heard that many people see the loss of the Junction as leaving a big gap in services for youth in the Upper Valley. So it's fortunate that you were able to benefit from their programs. What other supports did you have growing up here?
So I did trust my parents with knowing about my identity, that was really important for me. That's really huge. For young queer and trans people. I went through a couple of therapists, and I definitely trusted the second one more. And I also trusted my primary care doctor that I started seeing in my late teens. It's really important to have physical and mental health care professionals who you can trust talking about your identity. I didn't feel comfortable with all of the people I saw in the medical field, but I had a couple I could really talk to, which is a big deal because if you need to talk about safer sex or healthy relationships or gender dysphoria, you need to have somebody who's going to have these conversations honestly without judgment or hesitation, somebody who's willing to listen. And it's great to have professionals who are LGBTQ plus themselves too. And I felt like resources was the thing I lacked the most, though. The fact that I didn't have a queer youth space until I was almost an adult, I feel like I would have accepted myself much earlier if I'd had better access to resources. I really do feel that was something that was definitely missing from my life and something that as a community we could really improve on because even though this is generally an accepting place, the Upper Valley, I didn't feel like there was a lot of hate towards me. It's still so important to have a place where you know that you're going to be accepted, you know that you're not going to experience any bigotry, and you know you're going to meet people in your community who you really can connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. So Claire, what about having queer adult role models so you can imagine what your future would look like?
I feel like queer adult role models are definitely important once you've accepted that you're queer in particular. It is important before that too, but I feel like I really needed some queer role models my own age because there was definitely homophobia that existed at my school, and I really felt like I was so alone when I started realizing that I had some attraction to girls, and I kind of shut that down because I felt so alone with people my own age until I met a queer person who was my age, and he'd been in a bad situation and got out of it and was okay. And I had other friends that started coming out and they were okay, and that really changed my perspective. There was also a trans person who came out at assembly at my school, and that was huge for me. And I actually that same day I decided to come out to my parents for the first time. And, you know, coming out isn't a one-time thing because you always are having to come out to new people, but that was definitely a big one for me. That day I started telling my parents and my close friends, and I felt much more comfortable because I was seeing all these other people have positive experiences with coming out, and I knew somebody who had a really negative experience, but they were able to get out of it and they were able to find people who would support them, and that was really huge for me.
So this next question, there's some data that shows that risk factors are reduced in schools where there is a queer straight alliance or a similar type of organization. QSAs go by other acronyms such as a GSA or GLOW. I did notice in the video that it didn't specifically call out QSAs as a helpful support. Was this something that your interviewees mentioned at all?
You know, it was not mentioned a lot. I think one person may have, but I'm not 100% sure. These sort of third spaces that you talked about, I think was mentioned a lot more than in-school QSAs. It is helpful that QSAs exist, though. I'm definitely not knocking QSAs because the function they really serve is that LGBTQ youth in that school, they can go there and they know who to trust. You can, when you go to the QSA and see who is there, you can identify people who are theoretically safe. But one problem is in our small rural schools, these QSAs are quite small. And if you happen to have an interpersonal conflict with anyone in the QSA, you might feel really uncomfortable going. And then you would really need a third space that is often not available in these small communities if you're not comfortable with the QSA because of a situation like that.
So do you think that emphasizes the need for safe, welcoming community spaces outside of the school?
Yeah, definitely. Because some people are bullied not for being gay, but for other reasons. And other LGBTQ students at their school might be participating in that. So it's really important to have safe community spaces to address the need for everybody to have a place where they feel welcome, which might not be their school. And not all LGBTQ people share the same interests and values. And also in many of our towns, there isn't even a high school. A lot of people are designated sent to another school. And so having somewhere close to home that is safe to go can be important. But having some place that queer people from around the region can go to if they get transportation can be important too. Transportation is actually a major barrier when you're thinking of, and that's why it's really important to have spaces that are close to home for people in areas that don't have access to public transportation, which is actually something that some of our interviewees do talk about. But that's a bit of a tangent for this video, but I think it will come up when we talk about intersectionality, which is the last segment. So I'll hold off on that for now, but it is important and it is something that we'll address later.
So from your perspective, what could our community do differently to create or increase supports for LGBTQ plus youth?
I think creating more queer youth spaces, for sure. Developing and implementing strong policies against homophobia, transphobia in all youth spaces, even ones that aren't specifically just for LGBTQ people. I also think it's really important to offer LGBTQ inclusive sex ed in our schools because a lot of the sex ed that we have, in addition to not being entirely sufficient in other areas, is really very heteronormative and cisnormative. And not only does that affect us negatively in thinking that we're not normal, it also means that you're not learning the stuff that you might need to learn to feel secure in your identity and also to be safe when you do decide to have sex. And that's super important. I also think that there are some, LGBTQ spaces in the Upper Valley that are for adults, but they're not alcohol free. So they're 21 plus. And I think that if those types of spaces hosted some events that were open to younger ages and didn't have, you didn't need to be the drinking age to attend, that would be really helpful so that teenagers could meet, queer role models. And also that would be really important for people who are in recovery and who might not feel comfortable going to an event that's at a bar where everybody would be drinking. And I mean, that's fine if some of your events are like that, but I think it would be good to have a bit more focus on events where queer youth could also attend.
So thank you, Claire, for joining me and in this episode of A Closer Look. If you'd like to get more information about this video series, visit greenpeakalliance.org and see the media tab.